Everyone, and welcome back to Adobe Live. My name is Flynn. We're coming to you live from the land of the Darrell people here in Sydney, Australia. I'm very excited to welcome our next guest, illustrator and artist Bill Hope. Hello, Bill Hope. How are you doing?
Good, good. How you going, Flynn?
I'm very good. I've just realized that I've still got Jeremy Lord's name tag down there. So it reads Jeremy
It's all right.
Lord.
I'll be Jeremy for today.
Thank you. I appreciate you rolling with it. But the show must go on. So, so we were just chatting about you in the Blue Mountains, so in Sydney, but you're all rugged up, I'm sure, because it's the temperature has dropped here in Australia, so we're both probably pretty cold. I've got my Ugg boots on.
Yes, yes. Winter officially arrived maybe 2 days ago, 3 days ago, but
Yep.
it feels like today it really, really kicked in. But we are nice and toasty warm inside and ready to talk about figure drawing today.
That's awesome.
So looking forward to getting into it.
Well, cool. Well, hey, let's just jump over and start sharing your screen, particularly because I had your name wrong in the last slide. I guess why do we need to learn figure drawing? I guess I'm not going to grill you today necessarily, but I thought, why is figure drawing such like a necessary part of understanding, drawing and I guess the illustrative process?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's drawing people, which
Right.
is something that everybody wants to do. If you're drawing superheroes or characters for illustration or anything like that, you've got to draw people. There are a million different ways to approach drawing people. You can do them as abstract and as wacky as you like. As any approach is valid. But we're kind of talking about sort of traditional learning how to draw the human figure today. And it's one of those things where even if you're planning on doing really sort of abstract cartoons or very stylized, say, anime or something like that, all of those things, even if you're not drawing in a realistic style, it's really good to have some sort of fundamentals of how to draw the human body. And all those little things will sort of improve whatever alternative style of drawing that you're doing. So we're kind of going to be looking at a pretty sort of straightforward approach to traditional figure drawing today, and it's a whole sort of broader subject matter of drawing because it's really hard to do. If I'm drawing a mug or something like that, it's pretty easy to break this down into simple shapes. But human beings are very odd shapes. They're very organic. They've got lots of fingers and hair and eyebrows. There's all sorts of things going on. But the other thing is that because we're so naturally attuned to drawing people, we have a much more critical eye when it comes to looking at a person than, say, a car. If I've got something that's kind of like the distance between the front and back wheels on a car and I draw it 30% wrong, you're probably not going to notice. Whereas a person, if their arm is 30% too long, you're probably going to pick up on something like that. So it's quite a difficult thing to draw, but also we perceive humans in with a very sort of accurate critical eye. So it's a really difficult thing to get right. So today I'm going to sort of start off with a really simple approach. You can get really deep into studying anatomy and how the muscles all fit together and what all the names of the muscle groups are and everything like that. But we're going to start really simple. We're just going to start with kind of a stick figure basis. And I'm going to show you some of the ways to sort of think about building up your approach to figure drawing. I'm focusing on developing a skill of drawing people so you can draw the kind of people that you're imagining, not necessarily sort of working off a reference. So life drawing's a whole discipline of its own, and we've done a stream on that before. But I want to sort of try and give you the skills to sort of work up a figure from scratch and how you do that. Because that's really good if you're working on a comic book or a picture book or something like that. You want to be able to imagine freely, and then you can put down what you're imagining rather than having to find the exact reference or just working off something that you've already seen before. Okay, so I'll start showing you around these images that I've got here, and I'll sort of walk you through kind of my kind of thinking or my philosophy about figure drawing. Before we get into the details, please do put any comments or questions you've got in the chat. I just wanted to check, Flynn, are we receiving comments from Behance and YouTube?
Both, yeah. So if you're watching on YouTube, we're live there. So there's live chat there, and also on Behance. And I can see Manny and James in chat on Behance. Yeah, if there's any questions as we're going along, just throw them in. I'll see them and I'll ask Bill.
Yep, wonderful. Okay, so kind of my philosophy of drawing figures is that you sort of draw figures from the inside out. So I kind of think of that as a kind of in 4 layers. So the first layer would be a skeleton, the sort of structure inside the person. The next layer on the outside of that is muscle. The third layer would be sort of your skin and hair and all the exterior stuff. And the fourth layer, a lot of the time, would be clothing. So we're going to sort of work through each of those steps. And I kind of think about that as almost like we're starting with the least flexible part of the body and moving to the most flexible. So bones, hopefully don't move too much. Muscles, bit of movement. And then once you get to sort of free-flowing clothes, all of that's kind of dictated by the layer that's inside of it, if that makes sense.
Right, okay, cool.
Yeah. So we're going to start with a skeleton. And skeleton's a good place to start as well because there's some differences between a male and a female skeleton, but it's pretty similar between the two of them. So you can sort of start with it with a very similar bunch. Once you get into looking at sort of muscle groups and how people grow as they age, you get sort of quite different shapes between male and female, but obviously there's millions of different shapes that people end up being in. But you can start with the skeleton because that's pretty similar amongst most people. And we kind of start with thinking of the skeleton as a kind of shorthand of like the basis for a stick figure. So if I could draw on top of the skeleton, we're going to start thinking about just some really basic lines. So most obvious one might be a circle for the head. And we've got all these details of the scapula and the collarbone and the sternum and the ribs and everything, but I'm going to abbreviate that down into just one line across the shoulder. So if we kind of imagine a line there. So that's, I'd say, the second most important line, but the most important line is just one down the middle for the spine. This is the main thing that sort of dictates how a body moves. So we're going to really sort of think about the core of our drawing as a line for the spine, and a line across the top of the shoulders. And that'll be the basis for most of our drawing. I've got a couple examples here of drawings that I've done previously, and then I've worked on top of them to sort of show you how a stick figure like this might look. So we've got this sitting figure here, and you can see I've kind of broken down those quite sort of complex shapes into just circles for the joints and some sort of larger forms for maybe like the rib cage or the pelvis or the skull. And then in its most simplest form, it's kind of this simple stick figure of just lines and circles. I'll show you another one here. So we've got a bit more of a dynamic character here, but similar, just a couple of big shapes for the head, the body, the pelvis, and just circles for the joints. And then you can see starting to turn that, and it turns into quite a complex figure, but we're going to just be thinking about how do we sort of reduce down that information to something that's easy to work with, and then we sort of build up the detail from there.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more of the stick figures here. This is, I guess, a slightly more detailed version of it, and I'll just sketch it up and I'll talk you through it. So if I'm just drawing a basic standing figure, I'm going to start with the line of the spine and the line of the shoulders there. And below that, I'm going to draw sort of like an oval shape, and this is kind of representing the rib cage. And below that, I'm going to put an inverted triangle for kind of the pelvis. So you can see these are sort of really basic shapes, but they're kind of mimicking the shapes that would be happening in a real skeleton.
Right.
Maybe I'll just draw on top of the skeleton to show it. So I've got the line on the top, line for the spine, got the circle. And I'm going to put in this, these circles for the joints. And that's quite important where I put them. Because it's important to know where kind of the points of flexing on the body are. So I've put some circles on the side of the pelvis then. I'm going to draw some lines down the knees. And again, there's a lot of, like if you look up sort of figure drawing online, there's a lot of discussion about sort of getting the proportions right. And there's a whole study of how to get the right proportions in your figure. So they all kind of join up. I'm not going to get too lost in that. Like lots of people have discussions about like, oh, it should be 7.5 heads make up one body and things like that.
Right.
There is a certain degree of truth to those things, but everybody's different shapes. And especially once you get into drawing cartoon characters, like the whole body might only be sort of 4 heads tall or 3 heads tall. So you start moving with working with these things. But as a kind of really basic setup, I'd say that from the top of the head to the bottom of the pelvis is about half the length of the body. And then another half is for the legs. And if we put, say, a quarter mark, so halfway through the legs, roughly where the knees are there.
Right.
And that's a really sort of basic starting point for proportion, but that's a whole sort of rabbit hole that you can get into.
That's cool. It's good to have like a kind of basic kind of thing in your head, and you might be thinking at the same time, oh no, I'm going to make this disproportionate, so I can kind of throw that out the window while I'm doing this particular character or this particular artwork or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, hey, we just had a question actually. So the question from James is this the same approach you would do for animals? Inside out. Yeah, so I think they're asking a question about, like from a skeleton point of view and then out to,
that's a fantastic question. And it's a similar kind of thing of, I had this fantastic book growing up which just had skeletons of all the different kinds of animals, and it's very interesting to do a little bit of study there, and you sort of find that like most mammals are evolved from the same point. So they've kind of got all the same kind of bits as a human skeleton, but in different places. So say I was drawing a dog, I do the same thing of starting with a line for the shoulders. The line for the spine might be horizontal, obviously, but I'd put in a similar kind of circle for the rib cage. Pelvis is also still kind of a triangle shape at the back. And then I could sort of start putting in my front legs and my back legs. So very, very similar kind of thing. And the spine would join up to the head there. We'll put some ears on, make it a cute little dog. Anyway, we could get lost in that. But yes, very similar kind of premise of drawing from the inside out. Cool. And you don't have to think about it as you're drawing a skeleton exactly. You can kind of use these as a basis of sort of like blocking out the movement of a character. We're actually doing a stream tomorrow when I'll be talking about sort of characters in motion, so we'll get a lot more into that. But yeah, we're sort of just thinking of it as kind of a shorthand for our characters.
Nice.
So once you've kind of got that stick figure in mind, it's good to try and draw that stick figure in sort of lots of different positions to kind of get a sense of like, how does it move? The way I think about this is it's very easy to see a character like this in 2 dimensions on the page, like we've got there, but you want to sort of have it almost as like a sort of like a 3D mannequin that you can manipulate in your head. So I can kind of imagine if I move the arms here, how does it all work together? So you can sort of, let me just draw it out. You'll see what I mean. So say I'm drawing someone sitting in a chair. Hot tip for anyone is that if you're drawing somebody on something, it's always easier to draw the object they're sitting on, or say they're riding a bike. It's always best to draw the bike or the chair first.
Right.
And then you sort of match the body to it. So say we've got a very simple chair here, and I want to draw a figure sitting on the chair. So I'm going to start with my really simple lines that we talked about. I'm just going to change the color of my brush so you can see what I'm doing. So let's go with blue. But let's start with those really simple lines again. So I'm going to start with a line for the shoulder and a line for the spine. I know our figure's sitting in the chair, so I'm going to start with a sort of triangle for the pelvis there. And I'll extend some lines out from the top of the pelvis for my legs. I'll drop them down. So it's a really simple stick figure that we're starting with. I'm going to put the circle for the rib cage there. And another hot tip is it's best actually to draw. Often it feels logical to start with a circle of the head, but because the placement of the head is kind of dictated by where the rest of the body is, because the head's kind of an extension of the core part of the body, it's actually much simpler to draw the head last, and you kind of end up getting it in the right place first. If you draw it first, you often end up moving the body to match the head, and you end up with all sorts of weird shapes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because as you were drawing it, I was kind of thinking, oh, is he going to draw him slouched down or something like that? Because you could almost do that with the curvature of the spine, but then you change the angle right at the last second, and then suddenly it felt very natural for the head to be, basically level or looking forward.
Cool. Good to hear. I'm just going to erase some of those lines I don't need. So once we've got that character sitting in the chair there, maybe I'll put in some sort of circles for the hands, put the feet in. You can see I've already started manipulating some of these to line up with the major initial lines that we put in. So I've got that curve of the spine there, and you can see I've not drawn the circle sort of completely straight on. I've sort of warped it a little bit to match the line of the spine there. And I've done a similar thing with the pelvis as well. So you're sort of using those initial lines that you put down, and they dictate the movement of everything else. So say I put that on a layer. I'm just going to drop the opacity of that. And I'm going to start building up a little bit more detail on top of my my character there. So let's draw the head in. So we've got kind of an oval shape. And I'm sure everyone will have seen sort of using a cross on the face to give a sense of where the proportions of the face might go. Again, it's a whole other live stream sort of talking about drawing a face, but we're kind of imagining it as sort of like this squished ball shape. And if I drew a line all the way horizontally and all the way vertically around it, where would those lines go? So I'm just putting those lines in for the face. I'll extend some lines down for the neck. We've got a circle on one side for our arm, our elbow extending down. And I'm kind of just putting in these real abbreviations of what a hand or an elbow might be. And you see this line that I've done down through the middle of the face, that vertical line. I find it really helpful to draw a line like that down through the chest and the abdomen, just to give myself a sense of direction. So if you imagine I was wearing a tie, where would that tie sort of position as my body moved around? And having those kind of lines, you can even do one up through the neck, just gives you that little bit more information about what direction our body is sitting in. So we'll just block those out. Might have the legs coming down here. And I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit and starting to fill out this character. But I'm just trying to show you what I mean about using those lines as kind of a framework or an aperture that I'm adding the rest of the drawing to.
Yeah, it was interesting how high you put the hip joints. I mean, obviously it makes heaps of sense, but I would have been tempted to put them like way closer to the bottom of the chair, which would have been super wrong because they would have been, sitting under the chair once you put the I was going to say flesh, which sounds like Halloween, the meat. But that's interesting, like, because obviously that's, lots of experience of understanding and kind of goes back to that idea that you were saying, like, kind of got the skeleton and then you need to add everything. You are allowing space for that already.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point you raise around the hips. And I'm just putting in sort of simple kind of ball joints there, but it is worthwhile when you're looking at the hips and the knees and any of the joints to kind of imagine what's kind of functionally happening there. So say on our pelvis, it's what they call a ball and socket joint. So if I was going to draw the top of the bone in the hip, it actually kind of has this sort of nodule that comes out, and then there's kind of like a cup shape that it sits within. And you're never going to be drawing this if you're drawing a person wearing clothes or anything like that. But understanding how that hip can move. So I know I've got kind of forward and backward movement, and my leg can sort of go to a certain degree. Maybe if you're really good at doing the splits, maybe you could get your leg coming out at that angle. But just kind of knowing what kind of directional movement each joint can make kind of informs your drawing. So say I'm drawing someone with their knee. So that joint is kind of like if you imagined there being a cylinder here and the two bones coming down. It's got really good movement forward and backwards, but obviously you don't want the knee moving side to side in any way. That's a dislocated knee for you. So just thinking about what each of those joints can do, we're just simplifying it down to a circle there, but it's good to have that information in your mind about what can the bones physically do when you're starting to draw.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next stage that we'll go on to after we've kind of done our stick figure is kind of thinking about how would we build this up into something that had muscle or form in it. And when you're drawing a stick figure face on, it's easy to sort of see them as this sort of two-dimensional shape on the page, but we want to be able to sort of manipulate these figures in space. So we want to start using really simple three-dimensional objects to represent parts of the body, and that kind of simplifies it for us. So we can imagine what it looks like if an arm moves from seeing it side on to looking what we call foreshortening, sort of if it's coming towards you. And that's the difference between, okay, so say I was going to draw the arm here. If it was directly facing out, so this character's waving at you, we'd just sort of see it square on like that. And I'll put a little hand there. So our character's waving at us. But say they were going to move their arm down like so, we would need to sort of see it from a different angle. So maybe the upper arm would stay the same, but I'm going to imagine this as a cylinder that's moved towards us here. So I'll still put the ball in for the shoulder and the elbow here, but our arm has moved down and we're kind of imagining that as a cylinder coming towards us. So I'll put a hand there. So it's taking those very simple shapes of a cylinder and a sphere, and then we're just learning to manipulate those, because it's quite easy to imagine moving a ball in our mind, and it's relatively easy to imagine moving a cylinder in your mind, and you kind of build those things up and slowly get to something where you're manipulating something as complex as a human arm in space. So I find it a really good exercise to just sort of try drawing cylinders from all different perspectives. What's it like if I'm almost staring directly down the cylinder? What's it like if it's at just a very slight angle? And it seems quite sort of boring, basic drawing these kind of things, but once you can do this and manipulate these easily in space, you're sort of building up those little levels so you can start drawing a person really in movement. And let's try and have a go at sort of drawing an example of what that might look like. So you can see I've broken this character down into a bunch of really simple shapes, and they would all be underpinned by the same framework that we started with, that same simple stick figure. So let's draw someone going for a run. So I'm going to start with just the line of the spine, again with the shoulders. I'm going to put my sockets for the shoulders in there. Drawing my sort of that barrel for the chest in there. I'm going to draw a line for my hips and extend it down into that triangle. And actually, you know what? Before I even get into this stage, it might be good because you sort of, something like this is already quite abstract once you start drawing it down. So often when I'm doing this, I'll do sort of the quickest, simplest version of like, okay, I think a person running is going to look a bit like this. A really, really simple sketch. And I've kind of got that in mind already. So what's kind of the most basic version of a person running? And then let's start sort of going back to our stick figure. So we've got one leg going down behind us, and then we've got one leg going forward. I'll put the knee there. I'm going to have one arm going backwards, one arm going forwards. And again, I'm just doing the head last and sticking it on top of the spine there. So we've got our really basic stick figure. And now I'm going to start adding sort of the three-dimensional shapes that we were talking about to kind of give ourselves a sense of what's the direction, how's this figure moving in space. So I'm going to drop the opacity on that stick figure sketch. And I'll start putting in some of those simple shapes. So I'll start with a knee there, and then just doing some simple cylinders, and I'm kind of trying to imagine what would that cylinder be doing if I was looking at it? If this was just a simple blocky kind of person. One good way to experiment with this is actually just drawing Lego figures, because they're kind of already, there's a really simplified version of this, right. And you can kind of move their legs around. and doing them in space. It's actually surprisingly tricky to get a Lego figure quite right. I think it's because it's another one of those figures like the human body that we all kind of subconsciously know what the proportions of a Lego figure should look like.
Right.
But it's a really good exercise.
That's a fun one. I haven't seen anyone do that one before.
Yeah. So you can see I've started adding some kind of detail to that circle that we were working with. And the lines that I'm putting here are some lines that I find really helpful. And that's kind of just imagining what would be, if this was a real rib cage, what would be the bottom rung of the ribs there if I was going to draw them all in. So I'm just doing those 2 lines down the bottom. And this sort of middle section of the body here, I've kind of put a tube in there, which is not really helpful. But when you think about a skeleton, there's nothing really going on in that section. It's just kind of the spine. I mean, you've got all your intestines and things like that. But it's good to just focus on like, what are those big shapes of the rib cage and the spine going at the back, connecting to the pelvis, and then you kind of just join those bits up once you've got those core sections in.
Because it's kind of the meat part, right? Like it's all movable and squishy and and things like that. Yeah. Well, squishy on me anyway.
So I want this arm to be coming a little bit towards us. So again, I'm just using slightly angled versions of these cylinders. Another thing that I found really useful, I think we've talked about this on the stream before, is kind of starting off drawing robots or something like Iron Man or something like that. Because you're kind of halfway there. If you imagine putting some bolts or something onto this character, it can be sort of halfway a robot. And it's just really useful to sort of start thinking about how's this working in 3-dimensional space. And all of this can feel sort of like it's not it may not be the character that you're imagining, but all these subtle things like the curvature of the line there is going to end up informing things that you'll start doing once you're developing your character. So say I'll just quickly finish up the hands for this character. Say I dropped off the opacity of that and I had a character that was wearing really cool space boots or something. You can see that curvature of the cylinder there. I'm matching that curvature with, say, like the top of the boot or something there. And then say the laces on the top of the boot will match the curvature of that cylinder I had there. And it's all those little bits of information that gives something their sense of sort of 3-dimensionality. So you don't have to draw sort of this blocky cylinder person every time that you're drawing a character, but it's really good to have that in your mind about just what are those lines that I'm drawing. Say I drew one across, say I put a cross on the chest there. What would be the slight curves of those lines that are giving me information about how this object is placed in space?
Yeah.
So say this ends up being a person running in a t-shirt and the t-shirt's got an eagle on it or something like that. I might draw the lines at the top of the eagle and I'm matching those up to those curved lines there. And it's those little subtle bits of information that you're doing that are giving you information about where this character's is positioned in space.
Totally. Yeah.
So all those things kind of add up to give your brain little signals about what's going on in more detail there.
Wow, that's super cool. Yeah, it's very interesting about the cylinders, and I could notice, just those very slight differences of how you kind of translated the bottom of the cylinder of the leg there to the base of the foot. Like it was like slightly more towards you, it was slightly, but it was basically it was the exact same angle as the cylinder you did. And it makes so much sense because you could really easily think, oh no, they're about, you can't really see the sole of the shoe here because they're basically running sideways, but actually you should be able to see it from how the other figure and all the shapes relate to each other. So yeah, that's super interesting.
Cool. Yeah, and it's one of those things that it feels very simple when you're explaining it, but to do it and to get all the sort of subtlety into the sketch is quite tricky once you get into it. But it's about sort of breaking the exercise down into these little bite-sized pieces, so it's a bit more manageable.
Yeah.
So it's great to have this kind of approach in mind, but again, it is kind of an exercise about learning where things are in space. But the step that I would usually go to from stick figure is when I'm drawing, I wouldn't usually do the whole cylinder exercise. I'd kind of go straight on to looking at the muscles. So this is the next layer that we're putting onto our skeleton stick frame. And I'll start looking at that now. I've got a couple figures here. So these are, actually got them in real life here. They're these mannequin figures that I've got. So I have these on my desk. And they're kind of what they call a flayed figure. So I've just kind of cut the muscles. One side's got skin on it, and one is just showing all the individual muscles. So this is a whole sort of whole other topic of talking about detailed anatomy and all the sort of many complex things that go on inside the human body. So I've got books at home like this one, which is Classical Human Anatomy, which has lots and lots of detailed breakdowns of sort of individual parts of the vertebrae, or how different muscles in the torso fit together. I don't really know all of those off by heart, but I've got a general idea, and you only really need a sort of basic idea to get started. So I'll talk you through kind of some of the main ones, just sketching over one of the characters that I have here. So, and we'll just talk a little bit about those muscles. So we've got this very muscly man here, and I'm just going to draw over the top of him to start talking about some of the basic muscle groups that will apply to our drawing. So I'm just going to do a circle for the head, a line for the spine, a line for our shoulder. So I'm still kind of always referencing that basic stick figure that goes underneath. Okay, so I think I'll start with the neck. There's an awful lot of muscles in the neck, so they kind of connect at the base of the skull, and they go down, and then a lot of them sort of wrap around from the back of the neck down in to the top of the sternum there. So I'm going to draw one big line there. We've got all sorts of muscles on the back of the shoulder, and they all connect to the back. So you only sort of see the top of those muscles if you're looking from the front. I want to keep in mind the pectoral muscles are another big group. I often just draw those as a big circle. I'm going to draw sort of the line of the rib cage again. And got some big muscle groups in the bicep, and then all of the ones that travel down the back of the arm there. You can sort of really get lost in this and going into all the details of those, but I'm just sort of outlining some of the really big main groups. So obviously huge muscles in the thighs, and it's really good to work over some of these characters and just sort of do what I'm doing here of sort of selecting the really big main ones and trying to separate those out and drawing the figure from all different angles, and it starts sort of building up in your mind a picture of what are those big kind of muscle groups there.
Yeah.
So you can see I've kind of got a really blocky version of that. I'm going to bring that over here, and we're going to start with our stick figure again, and then I'm going to try and sort of apply a few of those big muscle groups as we're going through it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like just understanding like the muscle groups and everything, and then because this is like a muscular kind of like figure, but then you're going to have like some shapes will have bits of fat as well. You might have someone a bit more portly, maybe I should say, and then you've obviously got clothes and the thickness of the clothes and everything that goes over the top. So it's super interesting just kind of understanding like that this is where the bicep will go and this is where the how the pecs might look. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's worthwhile saying, like, often with these kind of tutorials, you do end up drawing sort of like a quote unquote sort of perfected or very muscly human form.
Right.
And historically, that is, people were trying to sort of draw a sort of an idealized version of a person. Or if you're drawing
it's like the Michelangelo,
it's like
right?
A really, yeah, it's a really sort of idealized version of it. But it is worth noting that regardless of body type, all these kind of muscles do exist in everybody in sort of different sizes proportionally. But it is worthwhile drawing really muscly people sometimes, because it's kind of like, it's like an exaggerated version, so you can identify, okay, these are all the shapes that are there. I've kind of learned roughly where they are and how they connect. And then you can kind of adapt that to apply to any body type. So it's kind of just more or less of the same muscles that exist there. So I'm going to draw a person here, and they are not going to be a big muscly bodybuilder, but it'll be helpful to have that reference to work off. So you can see I'm starting with my basic stick figure, my line of the spine. I'm going to draw that sort of triangle shape. I often draw the triangle of the pelvis. I kind of imagine it like I'm drawing a pair of underpants, basically.
Yeah.
Because you sort of draw these circles on the side, and that indicates where the leg's going to attach. And it's a nice shorthand, and sort of the band of the underpants or something works as kind of the line of the top of the pelvis there.
Yeah. Hey, just before we move on, we just got a question from Jeremy. Jeremy from our previous streamer. Hi, Jeremy. He asked, did you ever own a copy of Brian? I'm going to say this terribly. Brian Hogarth's Dynamic Anatomy book? I feel like it's a rite of passage for anyone who's drawn anatomy. Do you know that book?
Wow. I have to say, no, I haven't. I feel terrible now.
I can't even pronounce it, so don't you feel bad?
No, I didn't. I mean, one that I did spend a bit of time on is one that's very common by a guy called Andrew Loomis, who was kind of like a advertising illustrator in the 50s, I think. That one's it's a little bit sort of outdated, but a lot of the advice is really good in that book. So that's another good one. But I should look up the Hogarth one. Sorry, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. One thing I wanted to bring up here is that you can see I've got two lines around the chest here. One is for the spine, which is the most important one, as this person's sitting. I've got the curvature of the spine in red. But I'm also going to do the line for the front of the chest. So we were talking about if this person had a cross on their chest, what would those lines be? So if I'm drawing in sort of the rib cage in blue here, I'll do the same for the pelvis, just so we can see those points. But it's really helpful imagining the spine, even though we can't see any of it from this angle. It gives us a sense of what's that main directional line through the body. And it does curve as well. If I was drawing the spine from the side, it kind of curves at the back there and then goes around. So it's good to sort of think about what that shape is as well, and how it moves when we move. So you can see I've got that little kink at the top, and it goes around the back as this person is kind of slouching on the ground. So I'm blocking in my joints with the circles that we've talked about, putting the base of it. And the trick with this thing is that, like, there are techniques for doing these kind of drawings, but you kind of just need to do it over and over again. I mean, I guess that's pretty obvious advice for any kind of drawing, but it's one of those things that does take a really long time to get a sense of where all the main things should go, and some of the mistakes that you often come along.
Yeah.
So you can see on this character, I've kind of, if I was doing the cylinder exercise, this would be the front of a cylinder and the back of a cylinder there. But it's kind of like if I made a perfect blocky cylinder shape out of clay, and then I just started squishing all the bits together. That's kind of the approach that I'm taking here. I'm kind of squishing those cylinders down into some of the big shapes. So one of the main ones here that I'll be drawing is sort of the calf muscle here. So this is the one that we'd looked at before. So I'm kind of applying that big muscle shape to the cylinder, and it starts to combine together to make something that looks roughly like a leg. Again, we had those big muscles of the top of the shoulders. I'm going to draw sort of those sections of the pectorals on top of that. Okay, so if I drop this off, drop the opacity off it so we can see a little bit more clearly, I'll start drawing some of those bigger muscle shapes on top. And I'll do that in blue. So if we're looking back at our big muscly man here, maybe I'll just focus on these muscles, the top of the shoulder there, the bicep, and the pectoral muscle there. And I'm just going to focus on those to give you a sense of how I would apply those to our basic stick figure character. So using that line that we've been looking at the front of the chest, that's a really good indication of one side of the pectoral. I'm going to wrap it around there. And it's really interesting when you're studying anatomy to start thinking about how the muscles connect, but they kind of overlap and go underneath and around each other as well. So something like this shoulder muscle is going to wrap down, and it kind of tucks underneath the bicep like that.
Right.
And the bicep sort of sits on top of it in that way there. We've got a line of the muscles on the shoulder. So we're just slowly building up from our basic stick figure. And adding these broader shapes on top. Now I'm going very slowly with we're sort of not really getting to an interesting character. We're just focusing on the body right now, but all of these things will start to inform our character as we build it up. Another important thing that we've completely missed so far is thinking about the head as a skull. And sort of how the skull dictates the shape of the face and the different bones that are present there. So I'm just going to block in a really sort of basic version of that. But if you have the time, working on drawing a basic skull is a really, really helpful approach to just figuring out where all the bits of the face need to go. I'll make some little tweaks.
Yeah, I always find it so interesting seeing like yourself and other people that are very good and experienced in drawing skulls, that how different a skull looks to how I might have it thought in my head. Like how you've got it flat on the sides. It seems to be a lot longer than I expect it. Like I would probably draw it more circular, but it's totally not. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, it is quite counterintuitive in many ways. Like all sort of if I'm drawing it from the side, all the basic tenets of sort of having the eyes roughly in the middle and things still apply, but it is often surprising how large it is going back. You sort of have a little eye there, and there's all this skull,
right?
That carries on, and just things about like where the jawbone connects, and how the skull comes out from it attaches at the base of the skull there.
I keep fixing my posture this whole live stream, by the way, because I feel like I keep fixing my posture. Like I keep thinking, because I'm looking at the curved spine, I'm thinking, oh God, I'm slouching again.
There's definitely a natural curve that goes in there.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, we could keep going with that one, but you sort of get the basic gist there of starting to apply those larger muscle groups that we looked at. And it's like we're overlaying the things that we've learnt about what the kind of shapes of the muscles are, and we're overlaying that on top of, let me just find the layer, this kind of cylindrical character.
Yeah.
And that starts building up those bits of information that make us look like, okay, we've got a three-dimensional person being constructed there.
That's awesome. We're very close to time. Yeah.
Very close to time. The last thing that I'd add in here is one really important thing when you're figure drawing is thinking about sort of the body as a three-dimensional object that is under the force of gravity. So it's really good to think about what is the weight, what's pressing down. If this person's sitting here, the main parts of the weight would be their butt where they're sitting, their hands as it's resting up against the shoulder. What are the forces that are kind of holding this person on the ground? And something like that really informs where you put the bits of the body and how they're structured. Like the weight of the hands there is going to be pushing the shoulders up, things like that. You just want to think about it as like, what is this as a physical object in space?
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're pretty much out of time, but that was my crash course in figure drawing. So thank you so much for everyone who watched and possibly was sketching along. Anything to wrap up, Flynn?
No, I think just that we'll be back tomorrow with Bill. So, so Bill will be back. And it was characters in motion, I think, which I'm very excited for. And, a lot of your examples that you'd sent over, and it's hard to choose because they all look amazing. I was like, which one best illustrates this this idea? And the one you sent through is really great. So I'm really looking forward to that and really understanding kind of, because I know there's a bit of a cross between the rules of animation and illustration. Like I know we've spoken about it before on Adobe Live with, I think like the Disney animators originating some of these kind of general ideas of animation that are still in use today, and you can see them in Pixar, and we'll talk about Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse. Like the same principles can build these really complex things that we see these days. So, actually, you know what? I've just got a really quick last question. Bill got a quick question. Let's see if we can take it. Hi, wondering if Bill had any tips on drawing a figure lying down. Mine always looks a bit flat, struggling to represent the volume of the body interacting with gravity. I mean, you kind of just spoke about it a little bit there.
A little bit, but one of the trickiest things with, I won't sketch out now, but one of the main things we're going to talk about tomorrow is foreshortening and how we sort of see the body from more extreme angles. And drawing people lying down is really tricky, actually, because we're often seeing them from these quite extreme angles. So yes, we will do that, and I will try and remember to draw someone lying down tomorrow on the stream.
Okay, cool. I'll try to remind you as well. So yeah, same time. So sleepy, that's not all. Yeah, if you want to jump back in and catch it all again tomorrow. Thank you so much, Bill. I love that. I was not expecting the muscle side of things. I don't think I've ever seen that quite done in that way. So that was totally new to me. And as always, just thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us here on Adobe Live.
No worries. Thanks so much, guys. It's been fun.
Thanks, everybody. That's it for today, and we'll see you tomorrow on Adobe Live.